I'm Kristen from Saddlery Solutions, and today we're going to go over my #1 saddle fitting error that I find through 22 years of fitting saddles, and that is where the tree does not fit the horse's withers properly. In this video, I'm going to show you what that looks like, as well as talk about some common signs in the horse behavior, as well as how the saddle feels that may be showing you that this is the problem that you're having with your saddle. So whenever I meet a horse for the first time, the very first thing that I want to do is take a tracing over my withers area right here, because this is the area that we see the most amount of ill fit in saddles. One of the reasons why this is there's no standardization of tree size from brand to brand. So a brand can call a saddle wide, they can call a saddle narrow, they can call it pink, they can call it purple, 38, 27, giraffe. There's no actual standard on this fit. And so when we look at a horse's wither, we want to see not necessarily the tree size that we're looking for, but what is the actual size and shape of this horse's wither. So when we go in and take that tracing, what I do is a cross section at the top of the wither, a cross section at the bottom of the wither, and then I'm looking at what the angle is between those 2 points. There's 3 reasons why this area is so important to take those measurements. Number 1 is that the horse's nerve endings that come out through this trapezius muscle actually come out through the top of the wither right here. And so that creates a ton of sensitivity near the top of the wither. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and show you when I palpate that wither, the reaction we get from her. Hi, Corenza. Hi, baby. She's aware that I'm touching her. And I'm just gonna sort of come up her wither, and you'll see as I get to the top, the reaction that she's having and the sensitivity that she has as I go up to the top of that wither. The last thing that we want is our saddle to put pressure right up here in the top of this wither area, because it's gonna cause the horse to wanna lift their head, get really tight in the base of their neck, and drop their rib cage, which is the exact opposite of what we're trying to do, regardless of whether we're doing jump riding, dressage riding, endurance, western, any of those disciplines. We don't want our horse to be hollow with their head in the air, because then they're not able to step through from the hind end. So if the saddle is too tight through this wither area, that's what I like to call the parking brake, where it doesn't really allow the horse to come through and use their energy properly in the saddle. The second reason why we don't want our saddle to be too tight through this area is the shoulder actually has to come back and rotate through the front of the saddle. And so if we've got a really tight focal point right there, then it runs right into the top corner of the shoulder, and now our shoulder can't rotate back. The third reason why we want to make sure that our saddle is having enough space through that wither is you've never had a riding lesson with your trainer where they said get your horse further downhill and more on the forehand. It's the opposite. We're actually wanting them to lift the front end and sit on the hind leg and use themselves. And so if our saddle is pushing down and tight in that wither area, then the horse is actually going to want to be more downhill versus being strong and coming up into the saddle and going forward. And so with a saddle that's too tight in the front, the typical things that we'll see is tightness in the base of the neck, teeth grinding, not wanting to move forward, the shoulders feeling tight, the horse feeling downhill are some really good signs that there's something going on there. Other thing that we can see when the saddle is too tight in the front is it's the #1 cause of what we call girthiness and cinchiness. And what that is when our horse reacts negatively when we're doing up the girth. Unfortunately, girthiness and cinchiness is one of those things that once a horse starts doing it, it's really, really difficult to get rid of. And so what we're trying to do as riders is prevent them from getting there. But if they do get there, having a lot of patience with that process, because they can get really afraid of the girth going on, because when you tighten the girth, it pulls the tree down onto the horse's wither and causes that triggered response of pain and discomfort, and then they want to pull away from that. So when I'm talking about how the tree fits over the withers, what I'm talking about is the front of the tree right here. So this is just an example of one type of tree. There's a lot out there, but I'm going to use this as an example to show you how it sits. So when we sit the saddle on the horse's back, obviously there's a panel under here, but what I'm looking at is this angle here and how that angle sits relative to my horse's wither. I don't want the tree angle to sit like this, where the point is pushing down into my horse's body. And I don't want the tree angle to sit like this where there's no pressure here and it's all pushing against the side of the wither there. What we're looking for is the angle of the tree to be fairly flush and even with the horse's body so that we're not creating that focal pressure point at the top of the wither that's gonna cause that pain and discomfort. So now we're gonna put a saddle on Carenza that's a really great example of the tree angle not being correct. That doesn't mean that this is a bad saddle. It just means that it's not the right saddle for this horse. When I put this saddle on behind the shoulder where I'd wanna see it, what I can see right away is that I've got a huge gap underneath the bottom of the panel right here. And if I look, the angle is getting tighter to the top of her wither. So what's gonna end up happening is all the pressure when we do this girth up is just gonna sit in two spots on either side of the wither, and it's gonna make her really sore and not really wanna come through and use herself. So when we've got a saddle that's too tight across the top of the withers, a lot of the time when we go to do up the girth, we're gonna get a negative reaction from the horse. So this is some really typical, I don't like how that feels reaction when they're biting the lead rope. Hey, good girl. And then we can see that every time I go and tighten it, how she's having that reaction in her face. That's telling me she's not feeling good about what we're putting on her here. So putting a different saddle on her that has a different tree angle, now when I look through the front of the saddle here, I can actually see that my panel is touching flush all the way down the side of my horse, and I actually have a little more space at the side of the withers here. So now when I'm putting pressure down on the head of this tree, we're not getting that same negative reaction from the horse. Whereas when I put my pressure down on the head of the tree of the other saddle, she was very unhappy with it. Neither one of these saddles are good saddles or bad saddles. It's just maybe good saddles or bad saddles for this horse. And so this is an example of a saddle that sits nicely along here, versus the other saddle is an example of a saddle that the angles just don't match the angles of this horse's body. And so she's gonna have that negative reaction to it. So this is something closer to what we would put in for the size of and shape of the tree at the front. So the last point I wanna make about our tree widths and angles are, when I'm talking about the width of a tree, what I'm talking about is the width from this corner to this corner across the horse's withers. When I'm talking about angle of a tree, I'm talking about the angle of this tree arm. One of those can fit and the other cannot. Both can sometimes not fit and sometimes both do fit. But these are both factors that we have to come and look at. Because if the tree width is too narrow here, it's gonna be really tight on that muscle at the top of the wither. If the tree angle is too narrow, it's gonna be really tight on our horse's shoulder. And so what we're looking for is the correct width from side to side at the top of our tree, as well as the correct angle of our tree bar in order to match the wither on our horse. So that's the very first factor that we're gonna look at when we're assessing a saddle for your horse. And it is by far the number one thing that is gotten wrong, especially here in North America with saddle fitting. And the reason that is everybody thinks that wide is good and narrow is bad without really understanding what wide and narrow means. So when we're talking about wide and narrow, remember we're talking width side to side here, as well as angle at the front, and we're assessing both of those things to make sure that they're fitting your horse properly. So this picture is a really fantastic example of showing where the nerves come out in our horse's wither. So if we're looking at the wither here, we can see here's where our nerves are coming out, and then if we look below where the saddle sits, we've got nerves coming out here. But if we have our saddle sitting along this line, then we are not hitting where those nerve endings are coming out. So if that saddle gets tighter towards the top, then we're getting really tight to where this accessory nerve comes out through the trapezius. And when that nerve is pinched, what it causes is all of these muscles in the base of the neck to tighten, as well as the back to drop. And so this is what we're trying to stay away from with that tree width and angle. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you can find plenty more on our channel, or you can find us at saddlerysolutions.com.